Well, good evening. This is a distinct honor and privilege and joy for me to introduce what I consider a true American icon. There's many in this room that he has mentored and continue to mentor throughout our careers, and we're all indebted to him. He's had a most unusual career, very unique. Born in 1926 in the great state of Georgia, Tifton, Georgia. 90 years old. But I sat on the Ralph Puckett leadership board with him at Fort Benning, Georgia last week. And he was ramrod straight in that uniform and looked like he could still lead soldiers today as he did yesteryear. We're very proud of this man. You know, it's sort of interesting. He was an Eagle Scout with Palm. At 15, he'd already soloed, flew airplanes, wanted to be a fighter pilot, but somehow or another, later on in life, he saw the light and became an infantryman. Skipped his senior year in high school and went to Georgia Tech because his grades were so good, after his father made sure that he focused on his scholastics. He came from a values-based family, and he carried those values throughout his entire career and passed them on and continues to do that today. He was a year at Georgia Tech and got an appointment to West Point, went to West Point, class of 1949. Couldn't wait to get out and get commissioned. Still had a desire to be a pilot, but quickly saw the light and became an infantryman. Got mesmerized with jumping out of airplanes, went to Fort Benning after basic course in airborne immediately. While he was in airborne training, the war in Korea broke out and immediately volunteered for Korea. Now, there's an interesting story. While he was in West Point, he was the captain of the boxing team. He signs into Korea and gets assigned to the 24th Division. And those of you who know any history of Korea at that particular time, that division was being pummeled. The assignments officer brought him in and interviewed him and told him he wanted him to stand up, train, equip, and form the first Ranger Company in Korea. The first Ranger Company formed since World War II. I want to remind everybody that this is a second lieutenant with no troop experience. And he had two other classmates with him, both second lieutenants. And in just several weeks, they had to put together this unit and put it into combat. And that's where the legend begins. On Hill 205, miles from any friendly forces, they were thrown into the heat of battle against a far superior force and held that ground. It was because of the way in which he trained those troops, all of them raw, all of them inexperienced, most of them not infantrymen, that they were able to do that job. He inspired and motivated them moving around the battlefield to make sure that they held their ground. Severely wounded 3 times, his men refused to fail him, moved him off the battlefield, and as he says in his book, that was the end of the Korean War for him. He spent a year in rehabilitation in Fort Benning, Georgia. A year in rehabilitation where he met his lovely wife, Jeannie, who became the bedrock of this family for 60-some years now, Ralph? 64 years. This is a remarkable lady, and if you read the book, and if you have any time to spend with her, you'll find out just what she did in support of all his endeavors, both active and in civilian life. After he finally got out of the hospital, immediately volunteered for the Ranger Department. He was an instructor, TAC officer, commanded both the Benning phase as well as the Mountain Ranger Camp. If that wasn't enough, he next gets assigned to advisory duty down in Columbia, where he was the man who started Lancero School down there, which is probably the preeminent leader development course in all of South America. I think it's 60-some years now it's been in existence. He is recognized as the founder of that. They have honored him numerous times, bringing him back there. There's a plaque in commemoration of what Colonel Ralph Puckett has done for Columbia and Lancero. And there's many of us in this room have had the opportunity to go down there and see that course in action. After going to the staff college, went to the 10th Special Forces Group, Bad Tolts. You got to read the book to really have an appreciation for some of the things that he did in Bad Tolts. This is a man who has the courage of his convictions, not afraid to say what's on his mind, not afraid to do the right thing, and prepared to pay the consequences. But in all cases, has always been proven right. Then Vietnam. Vietnam brigade commander and 2 battalions. He won a DSC in Korea. He won another DSC and Silver Star in Vietnam. One of the few people in our Army who have 2 DSCs. As much as he loved going to troops, they sent him back to West Point, back to the womb, back to train cadets, because he was known as an individual who cared about developing people. You read about Mike Nardotti there, who was one of his cadets at West Point. Mike hasn't done too bad. It was that kind of mentorship, that kind of care, that kind of upholding standards and reminding people what standards are all about and how important they are that Ralph stood for. There's a quote, I got it in my pocket here, that actually comes from his book, and it had to do with Korea, but I think it framed the philosophy of his leadership, and it became the bedrock for his time as a leader in the Army. And I quote, "In my mind, race, ethnicity, religion, or region never counted for much. What mattered was what they had behind their belt buckles and between their ears." That's what Ralph Puckett was all about. And those of us who had the privilege to take his sage counsel knew that. While at West Point, he was a regimental commander. General Rogers was a commandant. General Rogers got assigned to be a division commander, the then 5th Mech Division, which later got reflagged to the 4th Infantry Division. Despite the fact that he still had about a year or 2 years to go at West Point, and developing cadets was very important, his love of troops and the fact that he knew he could make a significant difference in the tactical unit drove him to ask General Rogers if he could come back to troops at Fort Carson. And General Rogers, recognizing that he had somebody very special, very unique, brought him back as a brigade commander. This was some very troubling times, difficult times, early 70s. We were transitioning into an all-volunteer Army. We had drug problems, we had race problems, we had morale problems. But in Ralph's unit, we didn't have problems with motivation, inspiration, standards, and what right looked like. He enforced it. He lived it. He was out there with them day in and day out. And the troops responded accordingly. But Ralph saw another calling. Despite the fact he was highly competitive for a general officer, Outward Bound reached out to him and asked him to come to work for him. And he went to work for Outward Bound, helping today's youth find their inner strength, and did that for a number of years. Worked for a high-tech company, formed his own company, Eventually, after many other moves, they found themselves back in Columbus, Georgia. And what's the first thing he did? Went to the Ranger Department and volunteered to be an instructor. Pro bono, you know. Throw me back in the fire. He has been an inspiration throughout the Ranger community, throughout IOBC, the advanced courses, the NCO courses out there. He is everywhere on that post. Anybody who wants to use his talent knows they just have to reach out and call, and he is there. 12 years he was the honorary colonel of the Ranger Regiment, deployed to Afghanistan and Iraq with them. He went to field training with them. He knew how to mentor people. He knew how to pull people up by their bootstraps. We all benefited from Ralph Puckett. He's a great American patriot. He's a great warrior leader. But he's a man of values. He's a man of tremendous character. We were all blessed to have him by our side, and we knew he was there to bolster us up whenever we need him. He's a special friend. And with his lovely wife, Jeannie, we find him very, very, very special, in particular in the Ranger community. And Ralph, we're looking forward to hear what you have to say.
Don't ask my wife if any of that's true. Senator Ernst, General Allen, General Kernan, thank you very much. Distinguished guests, my old friend and my mentor, General Nardati, thank you very much for having me here tonight. It's a real honor, and I do appreciate being invited. Jeannie and I feel that this area is something like home. We've been here numerous times, and it's always good to come back. It's always good to come home again. General Kernan, thank you for that very flowery introduction. I appreciate it. I'd like to put it in proper context by quoting the words of General Eisenhower. He said, "Humility must always be the portion of any individual whose reputation was earned by his soldiers and his friends. I owe everything to my soldiers and my friends. They carried me on their shoulders. Without them, I would be nothing. I also owe everything to my wife. We've been married 64 years, as I said. You can commiserate with her and congratulate me. It's been a great honor. She's the wind beneath my wings, and I really appreciate all that she has done for me. I also want to express my appreciation to Dr. D.K.R. Crosswell. He's the Colonel Richard R. Halleck Distinguished University Chair in Military History at Columbus State University. He said he was going to be here tonight. Is he here tonight? He didn't make it. Well, he turned what was a very pedantic listing of events in my life into something that I think is a worthwhile book. I'll always be in his debt. He put up with a lot and helped me a great deal, and I do appreciate it. I want to put out something right at the beginning. I'm neither a Republican nor a Democrat. I'm an American citizen concerned about the future of my country. Who writes an autobiography? Well, they're usually a famous person whose life and deeds have had a great impact on other people, or someone who thinks he has a great idea that if he could just get the Congress and everyone else to copy and implement what he's suggested, we'd turn out all good. I fall into neither of those categories. I just wanted my children and grandchildren to know something about the country that was handed to them on a platter. The world that was given to them by their forebears to treasure and protect, or to squander and lose unless they and their generation are willing to fight and even to die for the idea. I've been gratified by comments from my children and grandchildren who have said some things after reading the book. My grandson Jack commented early on when Big Daddy, that's the name that he calls me, when he was 23 and fighting the Battle of Hill 205, and those two Rangers saved his life, he was the same age as I am now. That had a big impact on my son. Well, my grandson. My granddaughter Sarah said, "Now I know how Big Daddy felt when he was saying goodbye to Nene." That's Sarah's name to her grandmother, when Big Daddy was leaving for Vietnam. And I've had similar comments from my other children and grandchildren. It's meant a lot to me because that's what I was trying to get across. I wanted them, I wanted them to know something about this country and what it means and what we have got to do and what they've got to do in order to keep it free. I've heard similar comments from soldiers and others, and it makes it worthwhile, all the work that I put in. And as I struggled with my writing, there were several ideas I wanted to get across. I wanted the readers to know how our country was woefully unprepared for the Korean War. Although our military force had contributed mightily to the winning of that war in Europe and the Pacific. Despite what that unpreparedness cost us, lives and treasures, we fell into the same unpreparedness abyss between Korea and Vietnam. After Vietnam, our national doctrine shifted from preparation and training for the small wars to the big one. President Bush said, "No more small wars, no more nation building. We're going to prepare for the big one." We were, however, and continue to be engrossed in what we have difficulty defining. Are Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and other conflicts, are they counterinsurgency? Or are they nation building? Or are they a modification of either one, or a combination of both? And as we consider these small wars, I remind us that for the individuals caught in a mortar barrage or an ambush, it's not a small war. It's the real thing. As we continue our questioning of what we're doing, we must not forget that the 600-pound gorilla is in the room with us. What about Russia, China, Iran, North Korea? In addition, we need to hold off, if we can, the ever-increasing national debt that may be bigger than our other challenges combined. Tonight, I want to go beyond discussing what I've written. General Conan did an outstanding job of that. There's no more to say. I want to comment on problems that we face today. I have no answers, but I do have some ideas that may be of interest to you. And I encourage you to take some action to stop or diminish the harmful effects of what's going on in our country. My question: can the American dream survive? The short answer is yes, but we must make some changes if we want to bring that dream closer to reality. I grew up in the 30s and 40s when the American dream was blossoming. This dream was created primarily by white America. The dream was a possibility for many, but not all Americans. Coming out of the Great Depression, we believed that if we worked hard, saved our money, became educated, we could become anything we wanted to be. We could even be President of the United States. Our country was mostly white. Immigrants, even if not white, could come to America and latch on to the American dream. They learned our language. Their children went to American schools, and those children became friends with American children, our children, and became fully Americans. Most people believed in God, country, patriotism, and law and order. While not a homogeneous group of people, we were much less diverse than today. I had heroes to look up to: George Washington, King Arthur, and the Knights of the Round Table, Ivanhoe. I devoured the books of Horatio Alger. He was a prolific writer, wrote about 120 books, and I must have read 30 or 40 of them. All of them are good, and all of them are the American dream. Work hard, be honest, be forthcoming, be a leader. You will succeed. I eagerly rode my bike to the drugstore each week to get the latest issue of G8 and his Battle Aces and the Lone Eagle. These were pulp magazines filled with stories of our heroic airmen in World War I. I wanted to be just like them. I was going to be one. And who are our heroes now? In many cases, they're rock stars, TV personalities, or athletes who disdain many of those virtues we hold. Some snub our country. They fail to render the appropriate honors when the national anthem is sung or the colors pass in review. The American dream worked well until 1954 when integration became the law of the land. All of a sudden, many of us realized the American dream had not included all Americans. It was not a dream that was available to everyone, especially people of color. Some felt threatened. They did not want to share the dream with those who were not like the rest of us. Maybe they were fearful that there was not enough of that American dream to go around for everybody. It may be hard to understand, but as a child of the South, I seldom gave much thought to the fact that the dream did not include everybody. Selfish? Self-centered? Maybe. I volunteered for service as soon as I was 17. I entered West Point later, and I graduated in 1949. West Point, with its few non-white cadets who were as smart or smarter than I, showed me that I'd lived in a two-part society. The Korean War caught our country flat-footed. The 8th Army, the U.S. Army forces in Japan were in poor shape. 90% of the crew-served weapons of the 34th Infantry Regiment were found unfit for training 6 months before the war started. 90% of the crew-served weapons. Divisions had been cut from 3 regiments to 2. Regiments had been cut from 3 battalions to 2, and right on down the line. There were about 25% of the 2.5-ton trucks, and about the same percentage of the Jeeps were unsatisfactory, were unfunctional. Some of those vehicles had to be towed onto the ships to go from Japan to Korea, and we were taking them to war. The physical fitness and military training of the soldiers were in equally bad shape. Why? The war in Europe had been over for 5 years. Some experts were saying that there would never be another ground war like World War II. In the future, all wars would be fought with intercontinental missiles, not ground soldiers. Puckett, you don't have a job. You're infantry. There's no need for any infantrymen today. But unfortunately, those experts never told the North Koreans and the Chinese and the others that it was all going to be done with missiles. They had other ideas. I was in jump school at Fort Benning in June 1950 when the Korean War started. I volunteered shortly thereafter. I was in Japan waiting shipment to the 24th Infantry Division in Korea when I was called in for an interview. And as General Conan stated so well, but something I'd like to emphasize, and I'd like to use it as an illustration of how poorly prepared our Army was. The Army that had done so well in World War II, and here was 5 years later. Although I was a brand new second lieutenant just out of the basic course in jump school, not one day of troop duty whatsoever, I was selected to form, train, and command and combat the 8th Army Ranger Company, the first Ranger unit established after World War II. The other 2 officers, it was a small company, the other 2 officers, classmates, just like I was, second lieutenants, not a day of troop duty. To exacerbate the situation, the other 2 company officers, as I said, were just about like I was. We didn't know which way was up. There were 3 sergeants and 22 corporals, and the rest were privates who came in the 73 enlisted men who joined the company. They were very young and on their first enlistment. Most were about 19. The average age would be about 19. I had 2 who were 16. One of those was killed on his 17th birthday in the big Chinese offensive later that year. They were good soldiers. One of the volunteers at our first formation exclaimed, "Good God, what have I gotten myself into?" I volunteered for an outfit made up of soldiers from every branch except the infantry and commanded by second lieutenants just out of school. End of quote. My view then and now coincides with that soldier's criticism. If our company was the best that the 8th Army could turn out, we were in deep trouble. A focused training program changed us into a combat-ready fighting machine and enabled us to become a fighting force of which we could be proud. Incidentally, my company was the first integrated Ranger unit in the U.S. Army. The 2 African Americans were outstanding. I've praised them in essays and in 2 books. America is no longer the country in which I grew up. 50 years ago, about 5% of Americans were foreign born. That percentage has increased to 13% by 2010. Of those, 9 out of 10 came from some other place besides Europe. These Asian, African, Middle Eastern, and Hispanic immigrants bring rich diversity to our country, to the music, the architecture, the cuisine, and sports, and they contribute mightily to the growth and innovation in science, technology, medicine, and other sectors of the economy. However, this diversity also brings problems. William Falk, the editor of The Week, described much of what has come to pass and is increasing the impact of the changes. Civility is eroding. Rudeness is becoming more common. Drivers endanger themselves and others as they speed up or block turns in order to maintain their rightful place in the traffic line. Public places become sites of noise and friction. Workplaces are becoming struggles for survival. Politics are toxic. Discussing them with others has become a no-no because this exchange of ideas becomes acrimonious and erupts into physical attacks. The fabric of the American dream is slowly but surely coming apart at the seams. If America is to survive as a democracy, we must reweave this dream with different colored threads. The American dream of my generation can no longer be the dream for all of us. We now have to create a new dream available and open to anyone who's willing to work hard to bring it to fruition. America has allowed itself to be weakened by the goodness of our nature. We have gone overboard on political correctness. There's a country western song entitled, "If you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything." We've done just that in trying to placate every individual, even if it hurts the majority of citizens in the process. We don't have to discard the tenets from which this country was built. We must stand for something. Colleges are stressing free speech. Educational institutions that were once known as bastions of free speech and thought are silencing conservative voices that challenge some of the liberal views. Students become violent and destructive, attacking people and destroying property. Some of our citizens have become havens for undocumented people and knowingly refuse to enforce our national laws. Where's the rule of law? Do we just obey and support those that we agree with, and we oppose those that we don't like? Our Congress is becoming more diverse and splintered. During the Reagan era, 60% of the Solons were moderate. Members of both parties crossed the line and supported each other or the other side 50% of the time. Solid party line voting is not uncommon today. We've got to bring our country together. All of us either pull on the oars together or we can continue to fight among ourselves as we rapidly take on water and go under. Our political parties for decades have followed policies of obstructionism. They fight each other. Neither puts our country first. The goal stated in one form or another is to see that the other party fails. Under no circumstances will there be compromise. I believe that the administrations, both Democratic and Republican, for several decades have been our biggest enemy. Each party would rather have the country fail than to be seen as compromising in any way. I don't have any solution. It's destroying our country. I see no one on the national scene who can pull us together. I'm hoping that some of those who are on the way up are going to do it. I'm not sure there's a politician who puts America first before his own political future, but I think there may be some, and we're hoping for them. Where's someone who can provide that leadership that will save us from this morass? Maybe a better question would be, does that person exist? Less than 1% of our total population serves in the military. These few Patriot volunteers are serving multiple combat deployments. Some have served 3, 4, and 5, 12 to 15 month deployments, with sometimes less than 12 months between combat tours. That is unconscionable. That's shameful. Those serving are volunteers are all of members of our military. And I know we have at least one person, one senator among us tonight who served in combat tour overseas. I knew her a long time ago. She's done very well. I'm proud of you. We're glad to have you. Thank you. Those who have enlisted since 9/11, or at least since we invaded Iraq in March of 2003, have volunteered knowing it probably meant they'd be deployed to a combat area. These patriotic volunteers have taken on the primary responsibility of every citizen in this country. And that primary responsibility is to defend his country if needed. The caliber of these modern-day patriots is one of the main reasons that our Army is the most efficient we've ever had. But it's resulting in two societies. There's the military, and then there's the rest of the country. I've had the uplifting opportunity to speak one-on-one at length with many of our soldiers, from new enlistees in basic training to multi-combat deployed tours of Rangers, senior officers and enlisted men with much combat experience. Filling our quota with the best has been difficult. The source from which we get most of our military is the 17 through 24 age cohort. There are about 32 million people in that group. 32 million 17 through 24 age. If every one of those 32 million went into a recruiting station and said, I volunteer, 24 million would be refused as unfit. They're unfit because they're physically unfit, they're obese, they have educational problems, they have drug problems, they've had problems with the law. What does it say about the future of our country when 3/4, 24 million of the people from the cohort from which we get most of our military are unfit for military service? 3 out of 4 unfit for military service. It's getting worse. Our citizens on average are gaining weight. The misuse of illegal drugs and prescription medicines is rampant, and it's growing in some areas of our country. We need a national focus on improving the physical fitness and health of our country. These statistics raise the question, can we depend on an all-volunteer military in the event of a significant increase in the size of our military? Can we depend on an all-volunteer force in case we need several million as we have in the past? My answer, no. The recent decisions by the Secretary of Defense that all military branches, including those combat arms in which females had been prohibited, would no longer retain that combat exclusion. There's been some debate. Would those females be required to register for the draft? Would they be forced to serve if needed? This increased need for volunteers during the surges in Southwest Asia caused the Army to lower its standards in order to get in the relatively few thousand people that it needed to fill the ranks and increase the size of our active duty forces and those who were committed. Some of these volunteers served well, but unfortunately the group had more problems than the group that came in that met the required or the old-time requirements. This example and others convince me that we will not have sufficient men and women unless we do something about our draft, something to bring people into our service. Registration of both men and women should be initiated now. The time between the threat and counting that threat has compressed and is going to continue to contract. You're going to have to work faster than we ever did when I was coming along. It's better to be prepared. Do we have politicians with the courage to recommend such a draft? I don't know. Our Army is not sufficient for a continuation of the level of conflict in which we've been involved for the last 15 years. It certainly is insufficient for what appears on the horizon. I believe that in a war requiring an armed force of several million, we would be unable to rely on volunteers. We need to prepare for that eventuality now. Although I believe that compulsory military service will be required when and if we become involved in major conflicts, large conflicts, requiring a significant increase in our combat power, I do not believe that the draft can be made palatable to people who have known for nearly 6 decades that they were safe from compulsory service. While I'm convinced that every able-bodied man and woman owes some service to his country, reinstating the draft would lead to civil chaos on the order of that existing during the Vietnam War. Support for our military today seems almost universal, and I believe that support would disappear if all draft-age men and women were forced to register and became eligible for involuntary military service. I believe that our Congress should begin to educate our citizens today that returning to a draft may be a requirement in the future. Strong support will continue to come from those families whose sons and grandsons are joining and rejoining and being deployed and redeployed in our military forces. We can depend on them. I know of no military commander who wants a draft, believing that a volunteer army is better than a conscript army. Commanders say that a draft would result in lower quality. It would result in unmotivated soldiers. I believe that would be true in many cases. But during World War II, soldiers were drafted to serve until the end of the war, plus 6 months. There was no requirement that a draft must be set at 2 years, as it was previous to the all-volunteer Army. The educational requirement could be set at any reasonable level. Theoretically, it would be one that would prepare our soldiers coming in for the various ranks, the various possible assignments to do the jobs that they would be called upon to do. The draftee is not necessarily of lesser quality than the volunteer. Those of us who commanded troops, mostly draftees in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam, will agree that we still had a good army and that draftees did the job. One significant advantage of a fair draft is that all who meet the physical and mental requirements would be vulnerable. They'd be interested in what was going on in our military. None of this, well, I don't have to go. I can sit back and enjoy my life. Our citizens would be significantly more interested in national and foreign affairs, particularly those that affected national security. And I believe that the Congress would be slower to vote for military action if their sons and daughters were vulnerable to that draft. I believe there'd be greater support for the Army. I was fortunate to have been born to a family that has been part of this country for generations. I'm a citizen because of good luck, chance, or God's will. I did not have to do anything to receive all the benefits of being a citizen. Most in our country fall into that category. We owe something to our country. There are many living here who were not born here. They're not citizens. Many, however, have become naturalized by virtue of military service or through other programs that we have. All of us owe our country something, real service, besides just paying taxes. Very few Americans, young people in particular, seem to believe that they have any responsibility to give something back. Military service is the furthest thing from their minds. Let somebody else do the fighting. The military, it's not for me. I have a wife and children. That so few of our young people and their parents see no responsibility to serve is disturbing to me. If not theirs, whose responsibility is it to defend our country? Is there another course of action besides the draft that could help alleviate the problem of too small an army? Probably not, but a national service requirement of some sort may help. We need a national service requirement for our youth. National service could ameliorate the problem of our far from sufficiently strong military and help inculcate the needed discipline and responsibility into young people. These youngsters will lead our country in the future. They need to be qualified as they can be to meet the challenges that our country faces. Serving with others from different backgrounds will improve their understanding and their ability to work together, to cooperate. National service can result in some youth becoming better educated, informed, qualified, and healthy. And I am not talking about an upgraded McNamara Project 100,000. I'm talking about the inculcation of a sense of responsibility to give something back to our country. A national service requirement can diminish the two society splits in which we find ourselves, those who serve in our military and the rest of the country. While I do not equate civilian and military service, those who perform in a civilian service may develop a feeling of responsibility to the country, rather than the perceived belief that my country owes me something. As more serve, there will be a bigger pool from which our future civilian leaders will come. Those who have served well will bring that experience and knowledge to political officers. They will serve our country better because they have served in the military. We'll have a better educated and trained citizenry for the increased demands of the future. Many difficult, sometimes intransigent problems face our country. We need better trained, experienced, and mature citizens. National service can help overcome our deficit. We can be better. We can move closer to being the light on the hill. May God continue to bless this great country in which we are privileged to live. Thank you for having me tonight. Please have a seat. Never stand when you can sit. Please. Please have a seat. Thanks. Do you have any questions or comments? I'd certainly like to hear your...
Better have some questions after that.
Yeah.
So ask away, take a few questions. Go ahead. Yes, sir.
Please. And please speak loudly. I have one of many failings. I'm hard of hearing.
Well, I'm a signal officer, so I speak loud.
Good.
Half the time I don't have a big megaphone, so I
Right.
have to speak loud. Sir, I've almost been fired a couple of times because I recommended what you're talking about is something better than just a 2-year draft or walking in and walking out of the sheep dip. I was almost fired when I commanded Fort Gordon because they didn't want to change the rules. And I was quoted by the press as saying, hey, the commandant says we ought to have a draft. Well, I said to this young lady as I was walking to the car, I said, you know, I just think we got to do a better job of training young people because they don't have any appreciation for this country. But I still feel that way, and I know you do. But I was a class of 52, and
Good man.
I did what my poop sheet said do. If you're alerted for Korea, send your wife home to her mother. So I did. But I served 35 years, and I really love this country. And I see everything that you said is true. Breaks your heart. Do you have any thoughts about how many hell can we get to Congress to get on board?
Sir, I think what we all can do, and that includes me, and I'm going to return to what I used to do, several things in trying to make my single voice heard. You can always call, you can always write. While I do not believe that they really read all the letters that I wrote, I know there's some smart college graduate, probably a master's degree, who reads my letter and chalks it up. He's for or he's against. And he uses that to affect his recommendation to his boss. I think it's worthwhile. You can talk every opportunity you get to your contemporaries, but what you need to be talking to is the youngsters, the kids, the teenagers, and the young people. Tell them about what's on the ahead of us. Tell them how great this country is, and they don't realize how great it is because we've always had it, and we didn't have. Many of them didn't have to do anything to get it. But I understand the way you feel. We've got a representative of our Congress right here, and I know she listens. Talk to her tonight before she leaves. Thank you very much, sir. Another question or comment? That either means you know everything or you're totally bored by everything I had to say. Any questions, comments? Sir General, do you care to take over? Sir?
Colonel, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, sir. It's a pleasure.